Hi, welcome to the Weekly by Biospace. I'm your temporary host, Heather McKenzie, filling in for Jeff Akst, who, along with Annalee Armstrong, is at Bio this week in San Diego. We'll hear from them a little bit later, but first, AbbVie kept the M&A ball rolling this week, picking up Apogee Therapeutics for nearly $11 billion. The new FDA reversal train continues to roll, with REGENXBIO set to resubmit for approval of its Hunter syndrome gene therapy in the third quarter. And Sangamo is declaring bankruptcy, with Eli Lilly and Astellas circling for assets and programs. Let's get into it. Hi, how's it going?
Hi, Heather. Good. How are
Mhm.
you?
Good. This is kind of just like a little conversation.
Yeah. Did you have a good weekend?
I did. It was gorgeous weather, and we took my dad out for dinner on Sunday night for Father's Day. Went to a cute little bistro that we like in town here, and he had salmon, and I had gnocchi.
Ooh, that sounds excellent. My
Yeah.
dad and I also went to dinner. We went with my sister and we had rigatoni bolognese. It was
Oh
amazing.
my gosh, and good on you for saying bolognese correctly.
I know. Well, I love bolognese, so I
Mm,
hope
mm,
for the times that I've ordered it that I know how
mm.
to say it.
Yeah, no, that's very important. Yeah, it was a nice weekend. It was good to spend time with both of my parents. And then we launched right into this week with a crazy busy Monday.
Yeah, always after a holiday weekend when you're just so relaxed and like chill. And then you go back into the week and there's so much news that comes after holidays.
Yeah, it's kind of fun sometimes, but then you look up at 2 o'clock and you're like, oh, there's my to-do list, and it's still missing a lot of check marks.
It but we got a lot done. We did quite a bit yesterday.
We did, and you guys can read it all on Biospace. But for those of you who don't know who we are, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Gabby, you go first.
Sure. I'm Gabrielle Mason, and I curate our daily Gene Pool newsletter, and I also curate our weekly manufacturing brief, which hits your inboxes every Tuesday.
And I am Heather McKenzie, and I put together our Clinica Space newsletter, which reaches you on Monday mornings at 3 a.m. If anyone ever wants to get up and read it at 3 a.m. Eastern, it'll be there.
I'm always up reading at 3 a.m. Eastern, Heather.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, let's get into it. So, AbbVie kept the 2026 M&A train rolling. They picked up Apogee Therapeutics for around $10.9 billion, and the deal it was widely rumored to be a sure thing on Friday. I think they were just dotting the i's and crossing the t's, but it came to fruition on Monday morning and was announced.
Yeah, so this deal gives AbbVie Apogee's IL-23 blocker. So that kind of bolsters AbbVie's already, very heavy immunology expertise from, Skyrizi and Rinvoq. So the new asset is a monoclonal antibody that's being developed for atopic dermatitis. It's a mid-stage drug. It's thought to potentially differentiate itself from the already approved Dupixent, which Regeneron and Sanofi sell, in a more kind of convenient dosing profile and appears to have kind of slightly improved efficacy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As much as AbbVie has kind of had a campaign in the past year or so to be known for more than immunology, they've really doubled down on it here, which is good to see because when you do something well, you should keep doing it.
If it's ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. This also kind of speaks to a major comeback trend for M&A that's happened so far this year. We had GSK earlier this month, paying 10.6 billion, so close to the Avi deal for Nuvalent Bio and its precision oncology candidates. And Lilly has spent a whole GLP-1 gold mine worth of cash on several smaller transactions as well. They were already up to nearly 21 billion by the end of April. AbbVie's 10.9 billion for Apogee has actually displaced that GSK Nuvalent deal as the year's second biggest, behind Sun Pharma's 11.75 billion gamble for Organon in April, and it's actually really the largest in what I would call quote biopharma proper.
And a huge thing kind of driving this M&A activity and uptick is our patent cliffs. So, for example, AbbVie, obviously just announced that Apogee deal. They lost exclusivity of Humira in 2023 and built a lot of strategy around its IL-23 asset, Skyrizi. So, this is an expansion of that successful strategic kind of focus. But this basically impacts, every big pharma, including Merck, obviously, with Keytruda, Amgen, and Sanofi, to name a few others.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a cycle of drug development, right? I mean, your biggest products are going to come off patent, and it just shows that even when you have kind of successfully traversed that cliff, like AbbVie is already kind of being known as an example of a company that's done that, but they still have to keep working because you've still got to rebuild that pipeline and yeah, so hopefully it continues this year. Love seeing that kind of money just pumped into an asset, for inflammation, for cancer, just because it shows how much the companies really believe in them. Well, Sanofi just had some pretty big news too about its pipeline.
Yeah, so they just announced a new R&D chief, actually. Human Ashrafan Fian is leaving after less than 3 years in the role, and Paulo Fontoura is taking his place. So Paulo used to be the chief medical officer at AI biotech Sarah, which they pretty notoriously raised 1 billion when they emerged, but they've remained pretty tight-lipped about their R&D efforts since then. So anyways, he's coming to Sanofi in September and he'll report to new CEO Balin Gurria. So analysts weren't super surprised by the move, citing some recent R&D disappointments and the new CEO's agenda to improve the pharma's pipeline prospects. So basically, her main goal is to bolster the company for when Dupixent's patent expires in 2031.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that she is making early moves. I think everyone wants to put their stamp on a company when they come into it, but good luck to Sanofi. Pivoting to the regulatory space now, and pivot is the appropriate word here. Regenxbio and Unicure are the latest rare disease biotechs to climb aboard the FDA's new regulatory reversal train.
Well, wasn't this train kind of already reversing last year?
It was, but now it's pivoted and it's going in a different direction. This time, the reversals are actually in the company's favors, and hopefully the patient's favors. So last Wednesday, just after last week's episode dropped, of course, because that's what always happens, Unicure announced it would submit for approval of its Huntington's disease gene therapy in the third quarter of this year. So this was apparently after yet another FDA reversal in this controversial case. And if you're not familiar with the Unicure case, Marty McCary and Vinay Prasad, their FDA, had insisted that Unicure run a sham-controlled phase 3 trial of the gene therapy. And this was after Unicure had apparently originally already agreed with the FDA in 2024 that their phase 1/2 data could stand as for an application for approval. But anyway, last week, the new FDA agreed that these 3-year data, these exact same data, could support accelerated approval, which is basically exactly what Unicure had been asking for in the first place. So last week, in one of my pieces, I asked, who's next?
And Regenxbio answered your question on Monday. The FDA rejected the company's gene therapy for Hunter syndrome back in February, kind of taking issue with eligibility criteria and external controls that were used in the registrational trial. At the time, the agency wanted Regenx to use an appropriate untreated control. But so after an appeal by the company, the FDA is now saying the original data is sufficient for an application and under accelerated approval path and that no additional studies are required. So now Regenxbio, plans to submit for approval also in the third quarter.
Yeah, I mean, in my editorial last week, I also asked the question at the end, what's a biotech company to do? Because they're getting one piece of advice or guidance from the FDA in 2024. They get completely something else last year, and then they're getting basically whiplash right now. So while this might be a good form of whiplash, you just have to wonder if you're a rare disease company, is this just under the FDA and in its caretaker mode under Kyle Diamantis, the acting commissioner, or is this going to stay? Well, these also aren't the first announcements that have hinted at a new rare disease perspective at the FDA, though. So, Replimune and Disc Medicine have also reported positive regulatory news since Marty McCary's departure in early May. But really, Unicure and Regenxbio might be the most obvious reversals. And now, for a special treat, we'll send you over to San Diego, where Jeff and Annalee are enjoying the gorgeous weather and some great discussions.
Hello, Jeff Akst here with Annalee Armstrong. How you doing, Annalee?
Hi, Jeff. We are reporting live from Bio here. We have found what we thought was a quiet room, and then we're starting to hear some sort of party next door. So I think it just really reflects the positive environment that we're seeing here in San Diego.
Yeah, and we're ending nearing the end of day 2, and I think there may be some celebration starting to pick up as the social hours start. But yes, definitely a more upbeat, optimistic vibe than we've seen in years past.
Yeah, it really started at JP Morgan. We started to hear that cautious optimism, and it's been really great to see that continue into June, which is, the last month of the first half of the year. So some real good stuff happening across biotech. We're hearing it in every session. But as we're also learning, we are kind of reflecting on 2025 and hearing a little bit more about how the FDA disruption has impacted biotechs, how things like the drug pricing policy has impacted deal making. So we're learning a ton here, and there's going to be a lot of coverage to come at Biospace.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really kind of tracking the FDA panels here, a lot of discussions among former FDA and other HHSers as well, former NIH, former CDC, and yeah, they're pretty candid about everything that has gone down in the past 18 months, much more so than last year when I think they were a little bit still shell-shocked of what was going on. So a lot of very pointed critiques of how HHS has changed in the last year, but not necessarily of the policies themselves, but more how they've been implemented. The panel I just came from, there was a lot of talk about how we were always hearing about transparency, this, transparency, that, but the sentiment was really forced transparency. We're going to force this transparency without doing it in a transparent way. It was very hypocritical in that sense. The specific example in that case that was brought up was the release of the CRLs. So yes, they published a bunch of, these complete response letters to have this quote-unquote transparency, but nobody knew it was going to happen. It blindsided industry. There was no transparency about why the change was made. And according to some of the former FDA lawyers that were on that panel, it wasn't even legal. Like, it was not the right way to go about it. So, again, a lot of candid remarks about not great things within the HHS, but, as you said, a more optimistic tone. All of these discussions ultimately come down to, well, where are we now? And it's already starting to feel like there's a little bit of rebuilding going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely hearing a lot of optimism about the FDA with the leadership changes. Actually, luckily, you are going to head to a session later today with a bunch of acting directors, which is super exciting. We're going to hear straight from those people. So really looking forward to that. So while Jeff has been doing the regulatory track, I have been firmly on the business track. So I have been attending panels on the IPO situation and M&A. Yesterday I attended a session where they really kind of got into all pieces of deal making, but one thing that really stood out to me was how the most favored nation drug pricing policy has just completely changed the way that deal making is happening behind the scenes. In this panel, there were lawyers and biotechs and people across the spectrum, and really what they said is they don't know what this policy is actually financially going to cost them, but they're still considering it when they are signing deals. And they're doing things that they wouldn't have done before, like they are including renegotiation clauses, which will allow them to revisit the deal, come back to the table, which is something you don't want to do when you're signing a licensing collaboration, an M&A deal. So that's the kind of stuff that has come out since MFN policy, and it kind of is funny because President Donald Trump has self-proclaimed himself the deal maker in chief. So he inadvertently has completely rewritten the rules for biopharma deal making. So that was kind of one of my favorite sessions. This afternoon, I just stepped out of a panel on IPOs and how to kind of prepare your biotech. I heard a lot more about how dual track processes, which is when you're trying to go for an M&A and an IPO at the same time, have basically become triple track. So now that third track, and there's a lot of debate about what that third track is. It can be a reverse merger, it could be a SPAC process, it could be a collaboration deal, but basically biopharma leadership is having to go out and prepare for every possible scenario in terms of a deal. So that gets complex, as you can imagine, but that is the reality of today. So look out for some stories on all of these issues coming as soon as we can write them.
The faster we can get them out, the better. I mean, I think it all comes down to how quickly can you change a massive government organization or a massive industry like biopharma. So it actually just came up in the session I was just in. Janet Woodcock, formerly of the FDA, always referred to it as this big ship, and they don't turn on a dime, and neither does the industry. So I feel like we were trying to turn really quickly with some of the changes coming fast and furious last year, and now we're catching up, and along with that turn, so maybe we're actually going to fully shift in a positive direction, by the end of this year, going into next year, with industry digesting some of the changes that are coming our way, both in terms of the policy on the pricing side, in terms of the policy and regulation, and working those into the deal making. Everything is renormalizing, I guess, and then hopefully we will be headed in a new direction, a positive new direction.
Well, and that kind of juxtaposes, wow, that is a tough word, with what is happening with the rise of China innovation. I met with a delegation from Hong Kong this morning who talked about how, as all of this debate is happening about how we address China, Hong Kong is kind of emerging as a bit of a bridge between China, like the global biopharma industry. And they were saying that, yeah, like it actually has changed like so quickly on the side of innovation, with how quickly China has risen, and it's hard to keep up, but you've been forced to. Small biotechs now have to contend with this new competitor that they wouldn't have to. They have to have the right teams in front of them from the get-go, from the startup point, to make sure that they are ready to compete in this area. But they also have to see this as a collaborative opportunity. So I talked to a lot of startup incubators and that kind of thing, who told me how small biotechs, startups are preparing for this new reality.
It's just going to be something that we have to continue to watch and continue to track. Again, not turning on a dime means there's going to be a lot of months of tracking how this is evolving. But yeah, optimism, I like it.
Yeah, it's been really good. I'm looking forward to hearing more positive stories here.
Yep, we have a couple more days left. We'll give you more updates next week. But for now, back to you, Gabby and Heather.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that little update. So back to the FDA, we've spoken a lot on this show about the agency's Commissioner's National Priority Vouchers program, which was implemented last June. And now the program has come under even more fire. It's been controversial from the beginning, people being concerned about transparency, especially when it comes to candidate selection for the vouchers. But last week, a memo by current acting CDER director Michael Davis was published, pushing back against attempts by former acting CDER director Tracy Beth Hogue, so his predecessor, to prevent approval of Sanofi's type 1 diabetes drug Tzield, which was actually one of the first drugs to receive a voucher in October. So HHS, I think this is that was a real benefit that Michael Davis put this policy briefing out there for transparency, because it really shows the inside of the process. But in other FDA news, the FDA also unveiled a clinical trials initiative yesterday, along with HHS. This is part of a broader attempt by HHS to really speed drug development. But the FDA's new pilot program would actually leverage collaborations with U.S. research institutions to reduce early trial timelines by as much as a year. They're also looking to shorten the time between drug identification to phase 1. And this is all aimed at really reshoring early stage trials from China and other countries overseas, is how Secretary Kennedy put it in the announcement. Well, finally, we don't want to leave you without an update on Eli Lilly. So here it is. A new report from Evaluate projects Lilly's tirzepatide brands Mounjaro and Zepbound will top the top 10 biggest drugs in 2032 with more than $70 billion. That is more than $70 billion in sales. And Lilly's new weight loss pill, Foundayo, which was just approved in April, also made Evaluate's list with a projected 25 billion plus.
I'm glad you repeated the 70 billion
Yeah,
because the numbers are just unreal. It's almost, I mean, it's hard to fathom that much.
it really is. It's also hard to fathom 6 years from now. I'm terrible at 5 year
Oh my
plans.
God.
I don't know about you.
Yeah, 5-year plans, we take it day by day over here.
Yeah, exactly. We're a real time kind of team here.
But of course, that's not the only Lilly news. The pharma is also bidding on some of Sangamo's assets amid the biotech's bankruptcy filing. So Lilly wants to pick up 3 of their platforms plus an early stage AAV gene therapy program. Astellas also put in a bid for Sangamo's Fabry disease therapy, which Sangamo is currently in the process of submitting a rolling biologics licensing application with the FDA for. So, because of the bankruptcy filing this week, the two pharmas have agreed to be stalking horse bidders, which means they get the first baseline bid in a court supervised auction. Sangamo has several other assets that will also, it will try to sell off during the auction, but this at least is a guarantee, a purchase for the programs that we just mentioned.
I love that term, stalking horse. It sounds so mysterious, and I just get these little like rocking horses in my head whenever whenever we
Like
talk about
scary
them.
movie rocking horses, like kind of,
Yes, the
yeah, I get
scary
that too.
ones in the dark rooms with with the
Mhm.
shadows, and yeah. Well, we will leave you with that happy thought and enjoy the rest of your summer week, and we will be back with you next week.